Hello, Taylor Ellwood here, and welcome to Magical Experiments. This week we're going to talk about the role of boundaries in magical work. And I think this is a really important topic because, specifically with spirit communication, because a lot of times what ends up happening is we have a container that is created that is not necessarily set up as airtight as it could be when it comes to spirit work. And a lot of times this occurs because there is left a lot of room for interpretation. And yet at the same time, there are other approaches to setting up a container that are downright draconian. So it's a matter of finding the right kind of container, the right kind of balance or approach to the overall work when it comes to spirit communication. And this is something that I think a lot of practitioners have different ideas on. And so I'm going to give you my thoughts today around setting good boundaries with spirits. A couple things I want to note before we go there. Go ahead and, if you're new to the channel, click subscribe and bell notification. If you're someone who's been on the channel before, go ahead and like it and leave a comment. And also be sure to check out my upcoming class, Advanced Spirit Communication. I have a link in the show notes. This is starting on October 10th. And I'll be teaching it with medium Joanna Brooke, and we're going to be discussing how to work with spirits over the course of a 4-week course. So, boundaries and spirits. When I think about how to work with spirits, the one thing that really stands out to me about spirit work is that a lot of the times you have an approach to spirit work with boundaries where it either goes too lax or too draconian. In the case of where it's too draconian, you see this in the grimoire traditions, where it's like, okay, we're going to summon up these angels, and then we're going to use the angels to compel the demonic spirits to do what we want, and if they don't, we'll punish them. And do you need to take that approach? Not really. Is there a reason for it? I think it has more to do with a Christian perspective on how these spirits would be worked with, especially when we consider that a lot of these grimoires were put together in the medieval era, and really were done as a way for people to kind of try and subvert the power of the church, but at the same time they had to agree with the power of the church, because of course they were going to get persecuted otherwise. You're welcome, jury. So then we have the two lax approach. The approach to magic or the approach to setting boundaries where it's kind of like, well, we can let the spirits do whatever they want. And the spirit, we're going to give the spirit whatever it wants and hope that it's going to help us. And, again, I think that this is not, this is kind of a school of thought that has come about, and some would say, I mean, I wouldn't lump devotional work toward in this, but I would say that there is a tendency even among devotional work to lean toward this at times. So the question comes down to, how do we set good boundaries with spirits, and what the heck are we doing when we set boundaries with spirits in the first place? Like, how does that even work? It's not, for example, do I say to the spirit, no, spirit, you can't do X? And that's an example of a boundary. But is that how we actually establish boundaries when it comes to spirit work? So here's my thoughts on this. When it comes to spirit work and setting boundaries, it really boils down to, first of all, being aware of your own boundaries. Like, what are you comfortable with? What are you willing to agree to or not agree to, as the case may be, in order to make sure that what you're doing is actually going to work for you? And this is a very important point to recognize. Like, a lot of times when we talk about boundaries in spirit work or things along those lines, we're typically referring to the spirit itself, but we're not necessarily paying attention to our own boundaries as much. But one of the things that I find really important to do with spirits is set some very clear boundaries around what is or isn't acceptable. So, for example, I might have a spirit that I'm working with, and that spirit might say, well, Taylor, in order for me to do whatever it is that you want to do, I'm going to possess you. Well, if I haven't consented or agreed to that, that could be a real problem for me. So one of the things that I always do is with spirits, I set very specific boundaries around like what I'm comfortable with. Am I comfortable being possessed by you? Maybe, but we might have to establish a bit of a relationship here first. And you might notice that in a very real sense, I mean, this is kind of a funny aside, but this is similar to relationships in general, like a romantic relationship, right? You don't just walk up to somebody that you like and kiss them, because chances are if you do that, they're going to slap you, if not call the cops on you or do something else along those lines. Because they're going to be like, "Well, why did you come up and kiss me?" And I'll even use a good example of this. Um, when I met Joanna, first couple times we hung out and talked, and I was getting to know her just a little bit. I actually talked to her a little bit at the first time I met her, and then kind of went off and did my own thing. Thought, interesting person. Second time I saw her at a poetry reading, we didn't really talk, but I saw her there. Third time I met, we were talking a bit more, and I was sitting beside her, and I held my hand out, and I put it at my side, and I was like, I was thinking in my head, I want to hold her hand at the time, and I'm like, I don't even know this person. Like, why am I thinking that? That is not like I'm not going to act on it because that would be an example of not setting good boundaries. And I use this. It's kind of a funny story. I mean, she said to me later on, she's like, I realized that when you put your hand by your side and you had your palm up, that you wanted to hold my hand. And I'm like, yeah, I did, but I didn't, because that wouldn't have been proper. I would not unless I had asked you, and I didn't know you well enough to ask you at that point, and I wasn't comfortable asking you. So the point being that like you start working with a spirit, and it's kind of a similar process where you get to know that spirit, and along the way you're also paying attention to how you know yourself. So I know that if I'm going to work with a spirit, I'm not going to just allow it to possess me. I'm going to say, like, well, we've got to establish a bit of a working relationship here first. What is this relationship going to look like? What am I willing to give you? What are you willing to give me? Is you possessing me worth whatever it is you're going to give me? Not necessarily, or maybe it is. So there's a very very important distinction to make there. The other thing I want to point out too is that spirits do get the opportunity to set boundaries with us as well. Now, again, if you go with the traditional grimoire approach, the argument would be, well, no, they really don't. You summon up the spirit, you force it to do what you want it to do, and then you send it on its way home, send it packing, and that's that. Well, if we take that approach, we're taking an approach that is very problematic on the one hand because it potentially involves us saying, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to communicate with the spirit. I'm going to expect the spirit to I'm going to expect the spirit to do what I want it to do. Well, what if the spirit has boundaries as well? Example, case in point, I tried to work with the goetic demon Visago. I didn't use the grimoire approach. In my upcoming class that I'm going to be teaching, which I have a link in the show, I'll be talking more about how I work with spirits. But in his particular case, he made it very clear when I did my initial invocation. He's like, I don't want to work with you. We're not a good fit. Go away. Okay. I left him alone after that. He had set his boundary. He said no, and I needed to respect and honor his no. So, well, I mean, some people would say, "Well, you don't need to do that," and I'd say, "Well, yeah, you kind of do. It's really the equivalent of somebody forcing themselves on someone else. It's not cool. Like you don't want to do that. You don't want to be that person." So, I think the same is true with spirits. So we have to be aware of the boundaries that spirits set, or at least we have to be willing to learn what those boundaries are. But then I think also part of the boundary setting is also goes along the lines of what what can I do to establish a safe container here where I can work with the spirit and we can come to some kind of agreement and we can or part ways, but that we're not committing to anything more than what we're willing to commit to. So in my particular case, one of the ways that I work with spirits is I'll be like, hey, I want to work with you. And this is what I can provide you, and in return, I'm asking for this. Is this acceptable? And the spirit might be like, no, it's not acceptable. Okay, we don't work any further together. Or it might be like, yeah, that's acceptable, we can do that. Okay, great. Then we start establishing the parameters of the relationship. So there's got to be an understanding really of what you're willing to offer and what the spirit's willing to offer, and being comfortable with saying no on either side and hearing no on either side. So these are my thoughts around setting boundaries, and I think like how I set a boundary with the spirit, just to kind of give you a little taste of what I do is, I will connect with the spirit first through a technique such as invocation, and I'll be like, "Tell me what you do. How might I work with you?" And afterwards, I think about it for a little while, and if my answer is, you know, this is the way this is how I would approach this situation, and I want you to work with me in this way, and here's what I can give you, then the spirit can be like, well, yeah, I can go along with that, or no, I can't go along with that. So it's really important to remember that there is a very fine-tuned, nuanced approach to spirit work that we have to consider when it comes to setting boundaries, and that a large part of this involves setting boundaries in a way where even when we're creating our magical working, like if I'm creating the container, I'm calling the directions, I'm calling to whatever spiritual forces I'm bringing in or whatever, that I'm doing it in a manner that I am honoring and recognizing what the boundaries are for myself. And I'm recognizing that just because I can call a spirit into the circle does not mean that the spirit will do what I want it to do. And that while I could try compelling the spirit, there may be better ways to go about getting what I want. And that's really been my approach all along, is take the approach where there's a better way to go about getting what you want. All right, that's it for today. If you're interested, check out the upcoming course, Advanced Spirit Communication. Registration is going to end on October 9th. So you have a little bit of time, but not too much. And if you want to change your approach to spirit communication, if you want to get better results with spirits, if you want to learn how to actually communicate and connect with spirits in a really nuanced way, then you'll want to check out this class coming up. All right. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.